Amen. This is the day that the Lord has made. We shall rejoice and be made glad in it. I'm excited about this second experience in the month of February. Each week we've had something significant, something to track, to chart. And today we are thinking deeply about the role of Black churches in policy advocacy, principally as it relates to education justice, primarily thinking about K-12 education. And this is a significant gift as we've been thinking through this entire month, not just about Black history, but we've been thinking deeply about Black futures. And this experience today will draw on the history of what it means to be the offspring of Black churches, of Black freedom fighters who were deeply committed to God and deeply committed to democracy, but also thinking about that history and how it should fuel, how it roots who we are as people who are aiming for a future, really having this kind of Sankofa moment that we're able to have a bifocal perspective. We're able to look at the past and the future in the present. I like that. That's what we're doing. We're looking at the past and the future in the present, reminding ourselves that we are the intersection of the past and the possible. And so there is no reason to celebrate Black history if we don't have a radical, stubborn commitment to Black futures. And so let's start this with prayer, and then I will introduce our thought partner, our thought leader, introduce our community leader who's going to lead us in a powerful conversation tonight. Make sure you're sharing this. Make sure you're getting people into the room. If you're on Facebook, I want you sharing this. I want you getting people into the room. This is a consequential conversation, and education impacts everybody. You may not have school-age children at home, but there's someone connected to you has school-age children, and we want to figure out what are the best practices, best strategies, best ways of engaging as the people of God, as radical Black followers of Jesus who are interested in saving every child, but also interested in protecting the future of our democracy and our economy for those children. And so let's talk to God, and then we'll introduce our speaker. God, we love you because you've been so faithful. God, you have engineered us, wired us to do the work of justice. It is the thing that you said you required of us as you talked to your prophet. You said that you require us to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with you. And that is why we take this moment of Black history so seriously, that we do not just ground it in history, but we anchor it into an opportunity to see beyond where we are. God, you are calling us to live out an abolitionist spirituality, a spirituality that is intolerant to, a sacred intolerance to injustice, to exploitation, to racism, sexism, homophobia, heterosexism, God, to genocide, to Islamophobia and xenophobia. You are calling us into a posture of abolition spirituality, that we are not just interested in what we're tearing down, but we know that there is some constructive and reconstructive work that you've called us to do. So as we tear down systems that do not serve us, we are prepared to build practices and communities and systems that create a future of sustainability, a future of sufficiency, a future of equity, a future of dignity. And so God, have your way as we speak, as we think, as we strategize, as we organize, so that your people will get the good and you will get the glory. It's in the name of justice and love we pray. Amen. I'm excited to be able to welcome my sister to this experience tonight, to welcome her to the Mount Zion family, the Mount Zion movement, and she is going to be an absolute blessing. We all know that education has been one of the issues that we have championed as a congregation very targetedly for the past year and a half, and actually, our speaker today, Deirdra Reed, is part of the impetus for how we're able to do the work on the ground with families, with educators, with school systems, with local electeds to do this kind of work. And so I'm excited to introduce Deirdra Reed, who is a partner at the New Teacher Project, TNTP, the way we talk about it in these justice streets, in these ed reform streets. And Deirdra is currently in the Charlotte area of North Carolina. When I met her, she was living in Atlanta and Nashville, where she has been she's been a community organizer her entire life. And while she is currently working in the ed space, she has worked in immigration reform. She's worked in economic protections, economic securities, economic justice. At the heart of what she does is anti-racism and racial equity work. She's interested in helping Black people build power, but she believes that Black churches serve a very pivotal role. Her theory of change centers the role, the capacity, the vision, the elasticity of Black churches. And so I'm excited to be able to welcome her here today. I don't know if she ever likes when I do this, but she has been affiliated with some of the most powerful churches in our country, particularly the home church of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., where she did organizing there in Georgia. Actually, some of the work that she did is directly responsible for why Georgia is blue right now, as she was working alongside people like Senator Raphael Warnock and the New Georgia Project with Stacey Abrams. She was one of the behind the scenes persons that was really helping to build this pathway towards Black power that got us a Black senator from Georgia, but also was able to oust the 45th president from the White House. And so that's how dope she is. That's how powerful she is. And we're going to hear from her as she talks to us about education, advocacy, Black churches, and the future of our community. So Deirdra, we're on you.
Thank you, Pastor Willie Francois. I am very humbled to be a part of the conversation today. I hope that I'm not frozen. Am I frozen? Are we doing good? So I want to just start by saying that above all that he has said, there's two things if you don't remember anything else about me. One is that I'm a Black mama that was sick and tired of being sick and tired. Like that's the start of the way in which I enter into the community organizing space, the Black power space, and then the Black church power space. And then the second thing I want you to remember about me is that I am the church. I grew up in church. I have a grandma that was an evangelist. My mother is a minister. My great grandfather was a pastor in Tupelo, Mississippi. So I come from a heritage of really understanding my place in the world through my faith. And so those two things ground me in like how I come both to the issue of building power and community organizing and policy change, but it also grounds me in why I am super excited to be on this call with you this evening rather. So Willie, I don't know where we want to, Reverend Francois, I don't know where we want to get started, but like I feel like I love to like, because I am the church, I love to take a text.
Do what you do. However you want to flow, good for us.
Good for us. Good. So I'm not going to take like a huge text. I'm not going to ask y'all to open y'all Bible and turn to this page or that page. But I do want to center us in because I think this is really critical to how we get to this abolitionist movement around education. When I think about the stories that are in the Bible, one that jumps out at me at this particular time in this moment in history is the role of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And in my mind, when we think of that story, like when I think about the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and how they have been brought that they are a part of an oppressed people, and that oppress as the oppressor, as the government, as the king of that time tries to figure out, how do I keep a thumb on the oppressed? He goes out and finds the best and brightest and then tries to assimilate them into the culture of the mainstream culture. And so he brings hundreds of young men, right, to the palace, and he tries to feed them the king's food. He tells them that they have to bow when the horn blows. Like, there's all these things that we hear about the story about how Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego end up in service to a king that is not theirs. And who is actually oppressive to everybody else. What was the goal? The goal was for them to acculturate these best and brightest, and then send them back out to be nothing more than overseers in their community, to help to be the face, of the oppression back even in their own communities. And so, like, when I think about like where we are in our community and how we're thinking about education, I don't want us to leave here without thinking about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. As it relates to our own education system, we know for sure that this education system was crafted and shaped in racism. Like, it was not meant for our children. And the best and the brightest of our children, sometimes, just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are placed in positions where they are awarded for their close proximity to whiteness, right? While the other, through respectability, through standardized testing, through other ways, are then pushed away and made sure that they have no economic future. In fact, we call it a school to prison pipeline. And so as we start to think about like, where are we at right now in this moment, I want us to both be thinking about, how do we fix a broken system and make sure that our children can show up as their whole selves at school? But then how do we fix school so that school actually mirrors or we redefine school as a place where I can be my whole self? That's number one. How I can get the tools I need to interpret the world around me, and then how I find my place in that world. And so if we're looking at education from that perspective, from this idea that the whole molding is that, United Negro College Fund kind of language, that this is about equipping young people so that they understand the world that they are inheriting. But then they're not going to stop there. They're going to find their place in the world, and they're going to do justice, love, mercy, and walk humbly with their creator. Then we've done our work. And so how do we start today in 2021 to start looking at where are the places in this broken system that we actually have a foothold, or we can be able to start to make some change, whether it's from an abolitionist structure or construct, or whether it is from a policy change construct. It's like, where can we do direct service work? What is in our hand? And then where can we also look for policy shifts that will then help us to create a new kind of education system that serves all children? And so I got some ideas, Reverend Francois. Where you want to start?
Wherever you say, just lead us.
Okay, well, let's go. Well, there's a couple of things that I know that are coming down the pike. We've got, first of all, I just want to kudos, Black folks right now, because Black folks have really showed up in 2020 all around the country. Whether people have said it or not, I know they have, but I want to echo that, in a two-party voting society, who showed up at polls were Black folks, and in particular, Black women. And we've done that work, one, because of the historical context for it. We know that we have been denied, voting rights, that we understand voter suppression. And so we decided, from 2018, honestly, on to 2020, that this was the most important election of our lifetime. And we got out, and not only did we get ourselves to the poll, but we got our neighbors to the poll. We got other folks that are in our sphere of influence to the poll. And that was great. I'm excited about that. That's what we should have been doing, right? At the same time, we cannot stop there. We do not live in a monarchy. These folks that we elected, thank you. So I'm sorry I got knocked off. I don't know how that happened, but I want to keep on going. We do not live, these aren't divinely ordered, representatives. These are literally supposed to be the representatives of the people. And so because of that, we've got to hold their feet to the fire beyond just getting them elected. And so what do we need to do over the next 2 to 4 years, right? So that we make sure that not only did we elect people who can come and sit in the halls of Congress on our behalf, but that we are equipping those folks who are sitting there with the information that they need so that they can, make the case for the policy changes that we want to see. And so to that end, when I think about education, we're in the middle of it right now, right? So we are still in the middle of a pandemic. We're in the middle of a healthcare crisis. We're in the middle of an economic crisis, and we're in the middle of a racial justice crisis. And who's caught in the crossfire of all of that are our children, because they are at home. And so how are we utilizing this as an opportunity? One, to have conversations with parents and students to understand what has been their lived experience, both pre-pandemic and as we're in this pandemic. We need to know if school was broke. Let's be honest and let's be real. For most Black and brown students, school was broken before the pandemic. All the pandemic did was show us how broken school actually was for our children, right? And so, how do we now go back and start to assess where are those places that we need to lean in? One, academically, how are our students faring academically? Do they have access to quality curriculum? Are they being challenged in these classes, both in person and, at home? And then how are we making sure that that they don't lose 2 years worth of learning? And let's be clear, that 2 years worth of learning isn't just going to be, if they were already behind, right? Almost 2 years of being out of school, we're passing 1 year and really not seeing those students probably get back into classrooms until next fall. How are we making sure that our kids don't get left behind? And I say that because of Marion Wright Edelman and not because of the Bushes. That we leave no child behind. We leave no Black or brown child behind. And so we need to we need to talk to parents and students to see their lived experience, to start to get a baseline of what they need. And we need to start to advocate both for ourselves as parents and students, but then also for, if you're not a parent or you're not a student, to advocate on their behalf as we go into this next legislative session. The second thing is that, again, we were in the middle of a pandemic. So it's a healthcare crisis, there's an economic crisis, but over the summer last year with the murder of George Floyd, it was very evident that we were in a racial justice crisis. And the question at hand was really around the policing of Black and brown bodies and how that looks. Well, policing of Black and brown bodies does not stop outside of the walls of schools. In fact, we know that the policing of Black and brown bodies starts inside of classrooms, right? And so how are we looking at the role of school discipline inside of schools, as well as the role of school resource officers inside of schools? Now, I want to be very clear, if we polled parents in the past as TNTP and asked them what makes them feel safe at school, and we get a mixed bag. Some parents say, I don't feel safe with school resource officers or policing inside of schools and classrooms. Others say that it makes them safe, that makes them and their students feel safe. What we want to do is make sure that each community, each school district, and the parents and students inside of those school districts have the opportunity to make the choice, to have the conversation, and to be at the table when those decisions are being made. What we know for sure is that, I mean, I know we know that Black and brown boys have been targeted. I mean, that is, we talk about the school to prison pipeline. What it conjures for us all is a picture of a young Black boy getting toted away, off of a school campus and going to the juvenile justice system. But there's a huge new report that the Appleseed Legal Justice Center nationally just put out. They looked at 3 different states, Alabama, Kansas, and Massachusetts, and they said that girls of color are 5.2% more likely to get a discipline infraction in school and end up in-school suspension or out-of-school suspension, as in comparison to their white counterparts. And so where the imagery may just feel like this is about Black and brown boys, it is about all children of color, to include girls of color. And so if we know that this is disproportionate, like, how are we looking at that data, how locally, and how are we helping to take a seat at the table and helping to start to think of innovative ways, whether it's restorative justice practices, whether it is any kind of professional development with teachers around biases that they have, whether it is the broken window policies, like, I'm going to suspend you for every little thing to try to prevent something big from happening. That they call that broken window. That broken window happens actually at school as well. It's like, how are we starting to unpack that in our local communities and come up with solutions? Then there is a bill, federally speaking, there's a bill called Counseling Not Criminalization. It's the Counseling Not Criminalization Act, which was entered into Congress last year, that was asking for $2.5 billion to replace policing in schools with school counselors, mental health supports, and healthcare. And so there, from, whether we're talking about federal legislation, which would, have a trickle down effect, like there's this pot of money that if your district would like to go after that pot of money to change their practices, that there would be money available for that we could fight for, all the way down to the local level where, the mantra was defund police, but school districts have a ton of money. They can reallocate funds to be able to figure out how to provide the kinds of services to really get under and unpack why students are getting in trouble, and then help to support the student rather than to just push them out. And I will link, Reverend Francois, we can link some reports. I can send some reports along for folks. There's a report called Push Out. There's this other report about the girls of color being pushed out. And then there's a third one that is by the Advancement Project that is called Police Free Schools. And so there's toolkits for us to use. There's ways for us to advocate both on the federal, the state, and the local level to make sure that we are addressing how our students' bodies are being policed in schools and what are the alternatives. And so wanted to see that. And then the second piece I want to talk about, the third piece, because we talked one about curriculum and what curriculum is actually being put in front of our students. 2 was the question of school discipline and school policing. And then thirdly is like, who are the teachers anyway? So when I think about, there's a TNTP just put out a new a new report called The Broken Pipeline, which talks about the fact that 53% of students self-identify as students of color, where in most districts, 80% of the staff, both teaching staff and administrative staff, are white. And so what does that do? Like, I run across and work with parents all the time, and they say it like this. They say, my kid doesn't have a teacher that looks like us. You know what I mean? Like, they don't have a teacher that looks like us, that looks like me. And so what does it mean that 40% of all public school students have not seen a single teacher of color inside of their whole academic lifetime? 40% of students, that is, will never see a teacher of color, like be in a class with a teacher of color in their whole academic lifetime. So what can we do about that? Like, one, we need to, call that out, to Reverend Francois's point. Like, all of this stuff is systemic as it relates to racism. It is historic. So there was a time during, segregation where you only had black teachers. And so what happened with the quote unquote professionalization of the teaching profession that then shut out teachers of color and made barriers for them to access classrooms and administration. So we need to do a deep dive on that historically. We need to talk about equity audits on the local level. What does it look like in your child's school? What does it look like in your district? Are you trending with the national trend that 53% of the students are students of color, but 80% of the staff is white? So how can we get an equity audit going on? Second is, how are we recruiting potential teachers of color? Like, how are we, making sure that there is a vibrant pipeline of folks who are leaving high school, going into college, or going into alternative programs so that they can become teachers, and then they actually make it into the teacher profession because of, good hiring practices at the district level. And then finally, how are we incentivizing people of color who are brilliant and genius and go to college to actually come back and teach in their local communities? Like, the teaching profession is wonderful. It's not the most well-paid profession. So how are we incentivizing it? Incentivizing folks coming back and actually accessing teaching as a profession. And so I want to stop there, Reverend Francois, for any questions or any, conversation that you and I want to have about it. But like, I feel like there's 3 levers of change right now. There is, a curriculum change, there is a school discipline change, and then there is a change in who's actually in front of our children doing the teaching.
Good. Thank you so much for sharing with us. You've obviously come off as a savant on this subject, and we are most grateful. I want to start with this question. It's a broad question, but I think it strikes at the heart of why this is important for church. What makes education advocacy a natural fit for Black church organizing and engagement?
Because that's our history. We are birthed out of a resistance movement. I mean, we're birthed, especially if you talk about, like the Christian church, it is birthed out of the fact that, white folks said that we couldn't go to church with them, and we said we will go to church. And so we started our own church, our own churches. Here's the, and we'll go through the civil rights movement. Like, we can do a historical, walk through, like, what role has, Black church played. But what we have to say is, like, where are the other autonomous spaces that Black folks own, that we have autonomy and agency to have conversations? Like, that is, like, to me, that's the foundation of where we are. Like, I spend, this is Dr. Warnock, newly elected Senator Warnock's favorite thing that I say. I say, he's in the pulpit, but you'll find me in the fellowship hall. Like, in the fellowship hall is where all the work gets done. It's celebratory, it's, survival, it's resilience, but it's also strategy. And so, they say, like, if I feed you, you call me a saint, right? If I feed the someone who's hungry, they call me a saint. If I ask why they're hungry, you call me a communist. You know what I mean? Like, you question, you turn that into some kind of a conviction or indictment on me, right? And so I'm saying the role of the Black church has always been both to feed, because that's what we do, that's the direct service part, but also to strategize about why are the folks hungry, or why are we experiencing this. And then the second piece related directly to education, about this idea of our autonomous space, is like, the Black church has always been a place that tied educational advancement with their congregation and the community. And so, I mean, I wish that we was in church, like, I wish we were, like, everybody could see each other. Like how many Easter speeches, how many Christmas cantatas, you know what I'm saying? Like, how many times, how many vacation Bible schools, how many Sunday school books, where you're asking, where we're helping young people learn how to read through either the biblical text, or through some other kind of interaction that they're having at church, and we've also incentivized that. You go to Black church and you are a member, like I am a part of the church. You go to Black church and you graduate from high school. Tell me it's not going to be some hoopla. Tell me that they don't have a little scholarship fund. It may just be enough for books. It may be $100, but they're going to tell you that your educational aspirations are important to both you and your growth and development as an individual, but then also to the congregation, because of the way in which we celebrate education. And so how do we reclaim our heritage as a place of, when our oppressor says we can't learn how to read, right? And you find us, in the fellowship hall, teaching folks how to read through either their Bible or this Sunday school book or whatever. How do we go back to that? Go back with intentionality that our churches are an abolitionist space, and that we are committed to education in ways for our young people, that if the system is failing them, that we will take it back upon ourselves to do that work.
I have a question that you helped me think about. Can you talk more about how our Christian education programs can actually be literacy advancement programs? Like, what does that take, right? How do we actually transform our Sunday schools into our Sunday schools, our vacation Bible schools, into actual academic enrichment supplements? Like, what does that actually look like, feel like?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I feel like I think that we just need to put some intentionality behind it, because I think that there is, I don't know what to say, like, we've got the ingredients there, right? And so most of the time that I go and talk with pastors and the folks that are over their Christian education, or the folks that are running their summer enrichment program, they will say stuff like, hey, we've assessed our congregation. I just made that up. They don't say that part. That was not true. What I want them to do is assess their congregation. What they will say is, hey, the person that's running our enrichment program is a, retired teacher, or a teacher that is, on summer break. And so there's this like way in which we're thinking about it from that perspective, but we haven't intentionally gone and made that a part of our theory and change and action. So I feel like as individual faith houses, but then also as a collective called the Black church, what we need to do is do this assessment of our congregations and say, who are the retired teachers that are in our congregation? Who are the active, teachers in our congregations and school administrators in our congregations? And how do we pull them together to have a real conversation about the academic overlay that we wanted to have a real through line from the academic outcomes of school, like from from your real school experience, that we want to open up, open up that experience and have that to be an overlay in how we look at the work that we're doing, through our enrichment programs, Vacation Bible School, and then Christian education programs. And I don't think that it's a heavy lift. I actually think that if we did that assessment and then we utilize, what's in our hand, right? Like the folks that we have in our congregations who know this work, they can help us to look at, what curriculum is grade appropriate and help us to train our volunteers for the summer to be able to do this work with some efficacy. The other thing that I think of is that's fundamental to this, and I think that it's a lot to think of, like K through 12, right? That's 12 grades, and we're trying to figure out how to do all of that work. But one of the things I do think that's fundamental to the way in which we think about the work is literacy, like this idea of literacy. That is so fundamental, again, to like the civil rights movement, to Black church, and the way that we look at the work. It is a talking point, right, for the way in which people talk about the school to prison pipeline. So they say if a student isn't reading, especially a student of color, a Black boy isn't reading by the, like with if he is not reading on grade level by the third grade, they are doing a formula to make a prison bed for that young man, because they know that if you're off track by the third grade, it will be hard for you to get back on track. And if you are not, the baseline is literacy. If you cannot read, then you are not going to function. And if you can't function, you will find your place in the underground economy. If you find your place in the underground economy, you shall be policed. And so we can bet, you know what I mean? Like they're making bets on our students based upon that. And so for me, what would be so helpful as it relates to the direct service portion for congregations is for us to take on that as a North Star of saying, how are we, ensuring that how are we making a North Star that our students are, reading by the third grade? And how are we aligning everything that we do, whether we have a pre-K program at our church, whether we're doing a mommy's day out at our church, whether we are, all of those Easter speeches and Sunday school work, all of that gets aligned to this idea that we have to make sure that our kids are reading. And then how are we cross-training our Christian education staff, our Sunday school teachers, and our Vacation Bible School teachers, so that when you ask that young person to read aloud from Genesis 1:1, and they start stuttering over some words, that some techniques on how to help them to break down a word, like the phonics behind it. You can pull that young person aside and say, hey, mom and dad, I'm going to pull them aside, and we're just going, we still working on this Easter speech, but I have the tools as this teacher or as this volunteer to be able to help to support them in breaking down words and also doing the phonetics behind the word.
This is good. And we have a church full of educators and retired educators, and I'm seeing some of them across the 3 platforms that we're streaming on who are raising some observations that I want to measure by you. One is the idea of Sunday school is very stationary, right? That is a sort of come to us kind of practice. How do we mobilize our resources as a hub of educators and retired educators? How do we mobilize that in some ways? That it's not saying, well, this is the church, this is the space where you come to get this academic enrichment, these academic supplements. But how do we actually put a Sunday school that is just as invested in literacy as it is in spiritual formation, just as invested in literacy? How do we put that on the road so that we're actually investing in these various communities where they actually are on a regular basis?
Yeah, I hear you, and I see you, and I raise you. Before I start there, I'm going to start with, like, can we do the one thing good first? Like, good. Like, can we, if you already have a program in place, can we make sure that that program has some alignment? And then once you make sure that that program has some alignment, then we can start to say, like, how do we, how could we make that program either mobile or a church without walls, right? Like how can we go out? And I have a couple of different examples. I'll give you one coming out of Spartanburg, South Carolina, where ministry, it wasn't a church, but a ministry partnered with the housing authority, and not in like the Section 8 housing, but like in the public housing. So you know how public housing usually has a manager station or some kind of a place in the, like a hub where folks can come and talk to the manager. It might have like a little rec center-ish feel to it a little bit, but it's like a little building. And what this ministry did was partner with the housing authority and say, we want to offer tutoring Monday through Thursday inside of the housing project in this building. And so they got the space for free, right? So they didn't have to pay for the space. The space was there. And then they just did a door knocking, very, very akin, to how Jesus sent out the 70 to just knock on all of these different doors and ask the parents, are your young people having problems? We'll be over here. You need to sign them up. So they'll, you need to sign them up and get a release form, but we'll have some volunteers that are sitting here and who will help your young people to get through to get through their work. And what I loved about the way in which they did the work was twofold. One was that it was about individual pod like tutoring with young people in the same grades, but then they also offered a homework hut. So like the tutoring was about like accelerating your learning. Like if you are behind on your grade level or like you're not reading, so we're doing literacy techniques, etc., for you to excel. But then there was this homework hut, which then took some of the onus off of these working parents and these low income parents to get the work done. But it also accelerated the growth of the young people, because what we do know about school, right? Like school is why we're trying to reimagine school, because school has this thing about like what it means to learn. And a part of it is homework. And so having those young people come in with their homework, get their homework done, make sure that homework was in the folder, make sure that folder was in the book bag, and sending them home. When they grab that book bag and get to school, half the battle of their grade was getting the homework done and turning in the homework. And so not only did it help to accelerate their learning and get them on grade level because they were doing this tutoring, it also actually helped them with their grades because they were the homework hut was helping them to get their homework in on time. And so parents were excited about it because grades were coming home better. Students were excited about it because they were showing up as academic scholars, right? Like they were showing up differently at school and getting different kinds of accolades at school because they're doing their homework. And we were helping to accelerate their learning. And so we could do that. We could both do the work around like, how do we, codify our programs at home, but we could also figure out how to do this work abroad. And the last thing I'm going to say about this, Dr. Francois, and this is real talk that I forgot, like you said, I'm talking about like how we can lean in. But the other place that is going to be super interesting, and this is coming literally out of you all state because it is being championed in part by Senator Booker, is that as they're thinking about the fact that students have been home for, right at a year now and some more, they want to put together a tutoring corps, like get national, federal funding for a tutoring corps. And then to be able to have this tutoring corps be funded by the federal government, but then work with low income students and students of color that are behind because of the pandemic. And so I would encourage us, sooner rather than later to pull together a committee in our congregations and start not only thinking about all the stuff that we talked about, like how do we want to impact, right? But to have a North Star that if this tutoring comes through, there'll be a real opportunity not only to engage students, but to engage students in a way that is both highly visual and publicized to parents. So parents are going to get that note home that says you are eligible for free tutoring, right? And so they're going to say, hey, I want to where give me the list of tutors, right? But on our side, it could also be an economic strategy for our congregations if we put together our own tutoring corps and then applied for the federal funding to actually tutor students. And so we're doing this as a labor of love. We're doing this as an abolitionist strategy. We want to be supportive of parents and students at this time. We actually could make a little bit of money off of it if we're proactive while they're trying to work out the kinks of like what this tutoring program will look like federally.
So we're winding down here, but I want to ask, and we're actually in overtime, 6 minutes over right now. We will end at the top of the hour. And Deirdra and I do this all the time. So these are conversations that we are always having. So you're eavesdropping on what our weeks look like. There are 2 million children, an estimated 2 million children who have slipped through the education cracks that have only been widened by COVID, but these cracks always existed. I want to hear these 2 million children. Like, what do we do about that? But the other piece is, and hold that piece if you can. But the other piece that I'm interested in is 25% of Black households don't have access to broadband internet, and that was as of October, right? What do we do? How do we respond to these cracks that exist, that 2 million children are not in the educational process at all, but also there are 25% of Black households and 20% of Latino households that don't have internet? What does that mean for education in this pandemic phase? But also, what does that mean for education prior to COVID and after COVID?
Yeah, that's a lot. And you know that I still need to make my ask of the fact that we need to hear people's stories. And I'll start there. The very first thing is that we have not, what I think that Black church and church is uniquely positioned to do that school districts aren't, is that some of those 2 million children are either in our pews, our virtual pews. We can touch them. They're in our families, or they will be more likely to come and talk at church or come to a sanctuary. And I mean that in like the literal and figurative speech of that, to a sanctuary, than they would at this juncture to a actual school building, right? And so I feel like the very first thing is that we have to show up as the embodiment of the sanctuary and have that clarion call to find those young people, to find those 2 million. Because when I think about the school districts, not saying that they aren't concerned. I work with school districts every single day. I'm thinking of one. I'm thinking of a Latinx superintendent out of Connecticut. She knew that she had 65,000 students, and she said there's 1,800 students from the day that we close school that I don't know where they are. And I can't get to them. I don't have a good phone number. I don't have a good address. I don't like that. Like I can't text them. Like the text comes back like that. She was very clear that I don't have access to those students, whether they're transient, low income, and or a student of color or a family of color. Where does she go? Where does she want to go? Church. She wanted to go to church because she knew that if a pastor said, come, if a pastor said, I want to talk to you, if a pastor put out the clarion call even to their congregants and said like, hey, it may be you, but it may not be you. It may be Big Mama in them. It may be your cousin, right? It may be, your kinfolk, your skin folk, you know what I'm saying? Like your kinfolk. We need to get to them. We had a better, as Black church, we had a better, we just had a better foothold in their opinion to be able to get to those kids that were slipping through the cracks. And so we need to make some strategies and again, be the embodiment of the sanctuary to call them in and say, hey, we want to be able to be helpful. So that's the very first thing. The second thing is that I hear everything that everybody says about broadband, and I believe in that. I feel like there's federal stimulus money even now in New Jersey that your governor has about $3 million of discretionary funds that is at his disposal to use only for education in the ways in which he thinks, is possible, or that needs to happen. So you all could advocate and say, hey, we want that $3 million or some subset of it to go to help to get broadband to, very low income neighborhoods. We could do that if you want to do that. What I know for sure about, broadband and access both now and in the future is that is like, we've got to figure out, and that comes from conversations, whether or not we think that broadband is a right or a privilege, especially in this time period. And we've got to be able to do that through having conversations with the parents and students about their lived experience. Because without that, this is, we're living a capitalistic society. They think that, like you pay, that's something you pay for. And if you don't have the money to pay for it, you don't get access to it. And so we've got to start having these kinds of conversations. And we need to have them sooner than later.
Man, broadband internet should be a universal right. It is a public good. It is like water in the culture that we live in now. And so I think that, but we know even water is contaminated and privatized in this country. So
exactly. So know what your fight looks like. And that's what I'm saying. Like, if you know that this is a fight, and that this is, and it's a new frontier fight, that you've got to have the voices of people who are impacted at the table to be able to make those, to be able to make the clarion call for it. And then the other piece is to push on the government to pay for it, like, and not to pay for the cheapest one. So like, I'm working with a group out of Baton Rouge, and there was, what the district said and what the folks said was like, oh, for low income families, you can get access to broadband. But then when you looked at what they were actually offering, it was one step from that little, remember how that little sound, like when you used to plug it up to the telephone, it was one step above that. And so it was not high speed. It was not helpful to students. It kept dropping low income students off, and they couldn't do their work. And so again, if we want to have those kinds of conversations, those conversations have to be led by those who are being impacted by not, inequitable access.
Sure. Here's my last question, and then we're done. We're done. And you can respond to this with as much brevity as you want. I see, you and I have, and one of our educators mentioned the Children Defense Fund summer program, the Freedom School. And you and I, I've worked with CDF for years, preached for them on the farm so many times. The new CEO, executive director, is a good friend of mine. But CDF curriculum costs, Freedom Schools cost, and it is a great product. Can you talk about how churches can think about fundraising or funding these supplemental programs, these enrichment programs like a Freedom School? Like, how do we fund these programs so that we actually are making the kind of impact that our communities need us to make?
Love it. So there's a couple things. It's like, I stand flat-footed on the fact that these systems and structures, to include education, commodify our Black and brown bodies. There is a number attached to every student's little behind, whether it's in a virtual seat or in a real seat. That amount can be anywhere between $11,000 and $20,000, depending upon what state you're in, depending upon what district you're in, and then depending upon what kind of labels, for lack of a better term, that they have put on your young person's body. So if you talk about a Black boy from a low income neighborhood that is also been placed into a special education program with an IEP, you get what I'm saying? Like, they're like, like there is a amount of money. What we have decided, because let me say that differently, because that was me. That was about, I was about to jump up on us. So we have not decided to fully embrace that, not as a point of rhetoric, but as a point of organizing. We need to look at that as a point of organizing, that we will not allow for the commoditization of our Black and brown bodies, and not figure out how those dollars are being used. That's the floor. Like, how are y'all using these dollars, right? Like administration, like how are these dollars being used? And if we have programs that we feel like, whether they're our programs or someone else's program, that we feel like would be beneficial for our students, that we are advocating for those programs. And so tons of examples. And Dr. Francois, what I would love to do, like, this was a, Black History step back, but what I would love to do, if folks were interested in it, is like really have a Black church workshop on like how to find, where's the money, how to find the money, both inside of your district budget, because it's in there, whether it's gang prevention money, whether it's tutoring money, whether it's after school money, there's money in that, in your school's budget. There's also money probably in your city or county budget. So when I think about Nashville, Tennessee, Nashville had done a really good job of assessing where our kids during the summer, and figured out that there was this just huge, this huge hole, like that, like there was just, what is it, summer program deserts. Can we say it like that? Summer program deserts. And not only were they summer program deserts, the programs that were available were not affordable to parents. And so they went out and did this power mapping and said, in these different neighborhoods, we need to seed programs that we will then, as a city, as Davidson County, fund, so that we could have places for young people to spend their summer, like summer enrichment programs. And then not only did they fund these programs, was there money for you to apply, as a congregation or as a nonprofit to run a program for the summer, they also provided technical assistance and support for those programs. And so, we have not, because we ask not, right? It's like, how are we going and making a demand to do some of these kinds of art? Like, first find out whether that there's money available, just generally speaking. And if there is money available, apply for it, right? And if there's not money available, then we should be making, we should fight for the money, because we know, especially when I think about, I know that people have mixed feelings about this idea of like defund the police, right? Like defund the police. That's a whole nother conversation we could have about like excessive policing and excessive dollars towards the police force. But even if we don't want to talk about it as defunding the police, what we can say is that if students are, you can track young people's activities during the summer and their ability to have access to quality programs with crime in your community, and you get what I'm saying, truancy in your schools. Like this is not new information to folks. Like they go to a police department and ask them for the data, and they will tell you, oh, in this zip code during these hours is when crime goes up, and it goes up between we're working with young people, or we're arresting young people between this age and this age. That is all you need to go back to your, to your city council, your county council, and say, hey, because you all know this, we want a program in this area. We do not want you arresting our students, but we want to provide quality programming, and we can do that. And so we've got to learn how to, not take advantage, because that's not the word that I want to use. What we need to learn how to do is to understand that they have commoditized our Black and brown bodies, and demand that money be used in ways that we think is proactive and helpful to our community, and not harmful.
Thank you so much, Deirdra Reed. You want to explain this prompt that we have here to sort of help people think
do
about?
At the final hour. I wish I would have made you put this up at the beginning, and then like people could have done it the entire time. Here's what I know for sure. What I know for sure is that if somebody tells our story, it's going to get told wrong. And so what we have to start doing right now, whether we want to fight for direct service in our communities, whether we want to look at policy change in our communities, we have to start to change the narrative about what it means to be a Black or brown teacher, parent, student, or community member that is concerned about the educational outcomes of students in our community. We've got to start talking about it. And so I am right now really wanting to hear from parents, students, and teachers of color about their experiences with education, both within the pandemic and and before the pandemic. And so I'm asking you all, if you have, you don't have to have like a dramatic story. In fact, I just want to hear from everyday folks. And I'm asking you to text SPEAK to 797979 and to fill out a form that will pop back into your text message that will connect you to me and to a project that I'm working on that's called Elevating the Voices of Real People. And so we'll continue the conversation. I feel like Dr. Francois, until we start speaking for ourselves, the story won't be right. And so we need to start there. Then we need to take our voices and our stories, and we need to start to do the organizing work that needs to happen, both in our congregations and then also into the community. So I'll stop there. Thank y'all so much for having me. Thank you, Dr. Francois.
Dr. Reed, you are the truth, and we are grateful for you and for your leadership that you give us consistently all over the country. And I'm excited about the work you and I are getting ready to stand up. That's really going to make some differences in our nation, and really going to make some differences in these households and in various local communities. So thank you, everybody, for joining Freedom Thoughts, a history of moving forward. And we are grateful for your contributions tonight, for your questions, for your engagement, for your likes, for your shares. What is beautiful is that because this is stored online, you can share this well after we log off. You can share this widely because we know that this question of education is central for what it means to build sustainable futures, and what does it mean to actually build a present that will allow us to survive into the future. And so thank you, everybody. I look forward to seeing you on. You all have a meeting tomorrow night. I'm told that I'm not allowed to come to. So you all have fun at your church meeting tomorrow night. Just don't vote me out or anything like that. Some Baptist churches do that. They tell pastor you can't come to the meeting, and then they vote the pastor out. That's how people act sometimes. But you all have a good time at that meeting, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all on Sunday. You all seeing me on Sunday, and that will be a delight. So you all have a blessed night. The Lord bless you and keep you is my prayer. Amen.
Amen.